The Houston City Auditorium, they didn't tear it down until 1963, and that was a 4,000 seat building that was the home of Houston wrestling for so many years. But when the Sam Houston Coliseum was built, they started taking the big shows over to the Sam Houston Coliseum. The first one, I think, was in 1950, and I believe it was a double main event. If I have the notes here somewhere, and I'll find them. World title, Lou Thesz versus Killer Kowalski, and Texas title, Danny McShane versus Miguel Blackie Guzman, who I got a chance to see. He, for whatever reason in the 70s, he lived in Indiana, and Sam Menaker was the booker, and Sam had a Texas connection, and I guess he was working a regular job. He had to be in his 50s, and I'm thinking, oh, here's this Blackie Guzman again. And then I get more involved in the business, find out he was like one of the biggest stars in the history of Texas wrestling. But it was, so when the big cards went to the Sam Houston Coliseum, it was a big money proposition. And I have one of Fritz's booking books that I got from a guy who had gotten it online somehow for 1977. And you go back and see that the Dallas booking office, Dallas itself was not doing big business at that time. It was not a big money territory. Now, Fritz had drawn ballpark crowds with Gene Kaniski and Dory Funk Jr. In Dallas for the big NWA World Title matches when he was still there. But now Fritz was in the late 70s on the downhill slide before they started the boys. Point being, Dallas would do $7 grand at the Sportatorium on a Tuesday night. And the rest of the towns up in the Dallas end were
couple thousand.
You know, a couple $1,000s, you know, when tickets were $3 and $4 and $5 or whatever. But you would go to Houston, and the houses would be $15, $20, $30, sometimes $40,000 when an NWA title match was on the card.
But that was the lure for Fritz. Hey, come in and work Dallas.
Come in and work for me, and I'll book you in Houston. Yeah, and since it was every Friday night, Houston was the payoff for Houston was equivalent to what the guys made for the rest of the week working the Dallas area. But even back in the 60s and 70s, with weekly Friday nights, you're looking at high six-figure grosses for the year. Now that today's money, that'd be what, $4 or $5 million? Easily,
and it was a constant. And when he had something hot, the Gino Hernandez Jose Lothario feud in 1978 was so red hot. It was every single week was just sellout after sellout after sellout. Once Gino turned heel. Unbelievable business. Absolutely unbelievable business.
And we mentioned the Dallas booking office, which primarily, up until about 1980, supplied a lot of Paul's talent, whether it be Doc Sarpolis was the booker back in the 50s and 60s, and Ed McLemore, of course, was a Dallas promoter, and then Fritz bought in and took over in the 60s. But when Paul switched to Southwest Championship Wrestling and started using the San Antonio office, which was Joe Blanchard's, it caused some bitter feeling that Texas was kind of starting to fragment. You had the Funks over in Amarillo in West Texas, Amarillo, Lubbock, Abilene, Don the Lawman Slatton, the local promoter, El Paso, Gory Guerrero was the local promoter. Then you had South Texas, San Antonio, Corpus Christi, Laredo, Harlingen, that the Blanchard office served. Fritz still had a huge chunk of Central Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, and up into southern Oklahoma. And Paul was still the jewel, and when he threw his alignment with a different booking office, it shook things up. But you were pretty much, you were in at that point. You'd stooged your way in pretty good. How did that get over in the Texas wrestling community?
Wow. Bruiser Brody.
What caused it?
What caused it was simply Paul didn't feel that Fritz was getting that great of talent, and it was a battle. Just got to the point where Paul felt that Fritz didn't really want to help anymore. So he reached out. San Antonio had been coming into Houston with they had their TV in. Wahoo was booking for San Antonio.
And Wahoo was a huge
And Wahoo was a huge hand and a friend of Paul's. Well, Paul hated Gary Hart. They did not get along.
Really?
Yeah, they did great business over the years, but they did not get along personally.
And Gary was booking for Fritz at that point,
I think he was.
He was always in the office.
He was in the office, and it was, I think that Gary was involved at this point because it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And Wahoo reached out to Paul and said, hey, instead of us fighting, why don't we work together? And I'm booking San Antonio.
Do you have any insight in why Paul and Gary?
I just think it was a personality clash more than anything. You know, Gary was Gary. Yeah. And if you know Gary, Gary's a creative guy. I loved Gary. Gary was one of the first old-timers that kind of took me in and explained things to me, would sit there and go, kid, you know, what do you think about this? And
you do a rotten Gary.
I do a horrible Gary Hart. I know.
Gary. Here would be, you see, brother, here's the thing.
Yeah.
You go
what do you
down
think?
to Halstead Street in South Chicago.
That's horrible.
Brother,
it sounds like Jim Cornette.
You know,
God damn, then you go down the street.
But Gary's kind of that street guy from the south side of Chicago.
Liked to smoke his dope. He liked to
Paul
hang
was,
out.
you know, a little more upstanding type of citizen of Houston high society.
And Gary's loyalties were to Fritz. So they weren't necessarily to Paul.
Yeah.
And Paul felt that he wasn't being heard by Gary. And when he reached out to Fritz to say, hey, help me out here, are you going to change bookers, or this isn't working with Gary, Fritz just didn't want to take the calls and didn't want to talk to Paul. So Wahoo reached out at the right time, and he had a good relationship with Wahoo. Blanchard and everybody met, and he decided to change. The last night of the switch, Brody was in the main event. I remember Brody being so pissed and looking at me and saying, you couldn't tell me this was happening? And I was like, I didn't, you know, I mean, to me, at that point, because I wasn't in the office full time, I think I was a senior in high school or just gotten out of high school, one of the two. And it's like, what the hell am I supposed to do? I just, you know, to me, it's everybody knows type thing. And
well, because Brody was over in every part of Texas. He'd worked early in his career out West Texas for the Funks, Frank Goodish, but he lived down in Boerne, which is close to San Antonio. Worked a lot for Blanchard, but at the same time he was God in Dallas.
He was God in Houston too,
and he was tremendously over in Houston. So he was the one guy that really could go anywhere in the state.
Which is funny.
You know, and it's so sad that we think today one state had 4 full-time territories.
Yeah.
And now they ain't 4 full-time territories. Go
right.
ahead.
But, you know, it's funny because Brody was like, oh, why couldn't you tell me? I'll never work Paul. I can't believe you do this. And he was back with us, you know, in a year working for San Antonio. Of course, you know. That's the wrestling business. But that night
what was Brody like in those days?
God, I enjoyed the hell out of him because he was always stoned. No, but he was great. Very son of a bitch was brilliant. I mean, he always was reading and just bright as hell.
Well, he'd been a newspaperman.
Yeah.
And a journalist before.
Cheap as the day is long, man. Cheaper than you.
Really?
Yes.
God.
Cheaper than Mick Foley.
Oh, now come on now.
Yeah.
Somebody give me a hat so I can throw it down on the floor.
I'm telling you. No, Brody was cheap.
He would squeeze a nickel until the buffalo farts.
You darn right.
All right.
Yeah.
So Paul goes with the San Antonio office. Like I said, in 1980.
With Wahoo and Tully.
And I was about to say that it not only brings, and Gino had been there before, hadn't he, at that point?